Hello, and welcome to Leadership as a Philosophy, Not a Checklist, question and answer session number 1. So the questions that I'm going to go through today are actually 3 questions that people have asked as I was consulting with people on this, and then I also sent some of this stuff out for people to review, and these are the questions that I got back. If you have questions that you would be interested in asking, or something you would like more clarification on, send an email to leadershipasaphilosophy, period in between each one, at gmail.com. And if you think you'd be interested in having a discussion that we record live, I would like to do that. Or perhaps I could call and we could have a discussion about it, because some of these things require some thinking. Only 3 questions that I'm going to go over, but one of them was such a kind of a deep question that I had to think about the answer for a few days, and I finally think that I got the answer, or a direction, because some of this stuff, like we've talked about, is new, and we sort of need to all think about it. So hopefully we get something out of that. Anyway, we'll just go right into the PowerPoint portion of the video. So thanks so much for your attention. Alrighty, so here we are at the question and answer session 1. So the first question that we're going to get into, just for everybody's information, I used the phonetic alphabet and a letter of the person's name, because 2 of the people that asked questions didn't want to be identified because they were afraid they would lose their jobs. So that shows you what sort of leadership environment they have. So first question, are leaders necessary? Now, this question was asked by one person who is mostly self-employed their whole life. So if you're self-employed, then you're your own leader. What I think, and sort of if you go and do some analysis over time and look, when I think a leader is necessary is if you have somebody that's really big on being an entrepreneur, and they've got a great idea, and they've got they saw the gap in whatever needed to exist, and then they rapidly go after that. Well, that's their talent, is identifying shortfalls and things that need to get fixed. But what they're not good at in some cases, and I would say most cases, if you look at a lot of startups, part of the reason they fail is that those people aren't good at the leadership portion, because I think entrepreneurs and leaders are different. Have some of the same characteristics, but you've got the entrepreneur that's off trying to, cure whatever it is they're trying to cure or solve. And the leader is the person that's sort of, hey, if this is the goal and this is what we want to do, here's how to take care of these people and do these things. And so if you're doing it by yourself, no, you don't need a leader, right? The only leader that you have, you've got your own example and your own thing. The other person that asked, so that's one instance. The other person that asked this, at 55 years old, had never had a person that they worked for that they would voluntarily follow. They butted heads with every boss that they had, or every boss that they had treated them like crap and was garbage and self-serving and megalomaniacal. And so that person's frustration was, if all they're going to do is cause a bunch of chaos and problems, why do I need a leader? Great question. Well, take that part of the question and plug it into the problem at the beginning. That means that this poor person worked for a bunch of people that were in charge but did not have the leadership talent or the philosophy to temper it. And so I think that leaders are necessary, but they need to be good. They need to be good leaders, not just people in charge that are tyrants. So depending on the size of the team, you may not need a leader. You might have somebody who's more or less responsible for answering some questions and being a reporter. But you don't need a leader to be in charge of 2 people. A leader type. You can have somebody who's in charge, who's the manager of the system or the process. Sure, that's not a bad thing. And then the other option is that, we talked about perhaps giving leaders a trial So somebody they've been identified, they've been through some wisdom and philosophy instruction and had to do some thinking, and then you go put that person in charge of a small group because they can't have a whole bunch of damage if they mess it up. So that's an interesting thing. So leader in charge of a small group, fine, but you don't need a leader for every instance. And if we go back to the competency and think about the distribution, we say of any group, you're going to have 20% of the people are going to have leadership talent. So, 1 in 5 are going to have the leadership ability. So you have 3 people. You might not have somebody that's got leadership ability. So you don't need a leader all the time, but you need a leader type around to start attenuating stuff. So this is my answer for why leaders are needed, and it sort of gets you into a rabbit hole, right? So if everybody is trained, performing optimally, there's no drama, every deadline is being met, everything that needs to be done is happening. There hasn't been a single hiccup in a month. Well, then you don't need a leader because everything's just running. However, I've never seen that happen. I've never seen evidence of that. What I have seen evidence of is that means that a leader has been around and has gotten everything tuned up, just like we talked about, attenuated the competence and the environment in pursuit of the goal. So the best people are doing their work. The right management types are in management positions. The environment and the culture are correct. And so the leader doesn't have anything to do. But you can't get there without leadership, right? You can't get to that ideal place without leadership. So they are needed, and it looks like they're doing nothing in this situation. However, so then there's that. Now, what happens in that idyllic environment when suddenly some random chaos that nobody had expected shows up? Who's going to run off and handle that? The person that's the system expert, the person that's the process expert, the one person that's the most perfect at this thing, but the chaos is over here. That's what a leader's for. Because if the leader's doing their job, we talked about the philosophy, vigilance. So everything's running well then you're checking stuff and looking at the environment, looking out, looking here, looking there. You've got integrity, you've got humility, you've got all that sort of stuff. But the person that keeps things running smoothly is the leader. The person that kind of goes out and might even go off and handle some problem and come back and nobody noticed that it got solved. That's when the leader's doing the right thing. Remember from the Tao Te Ching, said the best leaders nobody knows exist. Okay, so then Hotel asked, how does this apply to the education system? Well, this is not going to win me any favors. If you look at the education system, look at the results. So go all the way back to the problem where I listed, here's all the signs that leadership stinks. So high turnover, bad morale, goals aren't being met, tasks aren't being done. And then also look at the hierarchy where we talk about here's some leaders, and suddenly there's this blanket of bureaucracy. I've talked to several teachers, and I was a substitute teacher at one point for a few days, but that doesn't make me an expert, believe me. And a lot of educators that I've talked to spend 40% of their time filling out paperwork and reports to show how well they're educating. So what's the goal of education? Is it to fill out a form, or is it to teach the student? What's the most important thing, right? And it's feeding a blanket of bureaucracy that's at the administration level. I'll bet, just because it's the same for most organizations, if you were to get rid of 50 to 60% of the bureaucracy, everything at the bottom would get better. And there's also promotion problems where you get people that are able to quote the party line in the education system and talk a bunch of great stuff. They get promoted. All the teachers can't stand them. All they do is do a bunch of reporting and all that sort of stuff and cause a bunch of chaos. I've seen it. So what you need is somebody that's a leader around at several different levels, especially at the bureaucratic level. Why are we filling out this report? Why do I have to fill out a report that says that during math time I taught kids math? Or we did, whatever reading, and we had to do some reading and some literature stuff, and I have to do a summary of what I taught during the reporting. I can't imagine that that's got to be good, and it's a pain in the neck. Who wants to sit around and write down a bunch of paperwork when you should be teaching the kids, when there should be some instruction going on? I mean, that's the problem. So blanket of bureaucracy. I mean, I hear it all the time. The administrators are a problem. A big chunk of the funding goes to the administration of the school. And the question that I have for hotel, and we talked about it for a little bit, was, well, what do you think? Take what we talked about with the principles, so humility, integrity, empathy, vigilance, the goals, and the environment, and you tell me if you think that there's leadership in this certain school system, but I've heard it from other educators. So the answer is no, there's no leadership, just a bunch of administration. So we've got so much administration that the goal isn't being met. Because what's the goal? Ask yourself, what's the goal of education? Is it to teach the student, or is it to brag about how amazing you are at all these statistics that you're reporting? Well, statistics don't mean anything if a kid's not inspired and isn't learning anything, right? So, I've heard stories about people getting promoted because they're able to go talk a great game and they look amazing to the boss, but they have backstabbed and stomped on the neck of all of their peers as teachers, and suddenly they're the vice principal. So then half of the teachers quit because this person's a terrible human being and not treating them well. Or you've got 4 or 5 administrators that are sitting there saying, well, we need to give ourselves a pay raise, but we're going to have to cut the music program, right? It seems to me that if your goal was to give the students the best opportunity to learn, then you would do everything you could to make sure that at the end, the student got taken care of. Like I said, the 6 days that I was a teacher, I was offered a full-time position, and I didn't take it because I saw what I was going to get into, and I was refused to do it. So adherence to the system regardless of the results. One case, I walked in and we were supposed to be doing math enrichment for 15 minutes. Students were turning in papers to me, and this was 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade. And I looked down, and it was multiplying negative and positive single digits. So here's -1 times 5, 4. -2 times -6, 8. Okay. So I said, well, what's going on? They said, oh, we don't talk about math. We just have to fill it out and turn it in, and we get credit for doing our work. That wasn't correct. We did math for 4 hours. And then the principal walked by and said, what am I doing? I said, math. They said, well, math time is over. That was supposed to be 3 hours ago. I said, well, they don't know math. So that's the problem. We're just going to do the system, even though the system isn't producing the correct results. That's what a leader's for. Hey, our kids aren't educated in math. We need to go back and fix this. All right. Yeah, so you need leaders, and you need the principal of the school. It doesn't have to be the chief educator. They need to be the person that's watching, keeping an eye on things. And then we talked about this. You hear it all the time. Well, we have to do this so that we get our funding. Okay, what's the most important thing? Is it the student or is it funding? Right? And I've heard all of these things, and like I said, I'm not an expert at the education system, but this is what I know, and I'm sure that all you out there that are educators are going to have the same response. So this is the question that put me in a tailspin, and I actually had to think about it for a little bit, because the person that I was talking with, call that person Bravo, was wrestling with the question, and I could tell that they couldn't quite formulate the question correctly, but I think I got what they were trying to get to. So how does this system, which is not a system, right? How does this system work at different levels of a large, complex organization? And how are the tenets of the philosophy applied based on different events or locations in time and in the hierarchy of the business? Great question. So the higher up the organization, if you remember the tenets of the philosophy, integrity, humility, empathy, vigilance. Okay. So the higher up the organization, the way that you apply that philosophy separates itself from being individual human beings, because we're going to do the slide here in the next thing. So you're working and you're in charge of 30 or 40 people. Okay, well, you can do all that stuff and you have individual elements, you have individual response, or you have an individual relationship with all of those people. Not super in-depth, because it's hard to maintain 40 people, but you know enough and you're paying attention. So you have empathy for that person, and you can see when they're having a bad time, or you can feel that something's not right. It's an instinct thing that you can't teach. Okay, well, as you go up in the organization, so now let's say you're in charge of 400 people. So you've got some leaders underneath you and those 400 people. Well, then the empathy that you have is resonating with the consciousness or the culture or the mood of that organization, because it takes its own form as an entity. So now you get a bad feeling, you walk in somewhere, you go, oh, something doesn't feel right. What's going on? Something's not right over here. I don't know what it is. So you're feeling the consciousness of a sub-organization within your overarching group, and then you can start wickering it down. But the empathy changes from being an individual human being to the consciousness of that entity. I know it sounds crazy, but it's something that I think that this is correct, because every team has its own culture, has its own mood, has its own consciousness, right? And so when that team, remember we talked about it during the hierarchy portion, you get to that team and things are out of whack, you can feel it. It's not a human that you feel, you can see or sense something's wrong with the team. So I think that's what this question was. So how do you change that? Now, the higher up you go in the organization, integrity should be reflexive at this point. If you're promoted way up high, integrity, you should always have integrity. Humility, you're even doing less work because you're in charge of 40,000 people. What are you doing? However, empathy and vigilance got to be on fire. You still have to have all four, but the higher up you are, your integrity should not be questioned. And your humility, that's just, you're just going to have to realize it, that you're the big boss, but what are you doing? So a team of experts can still go and solve problems, but there should still be a leader that's keeping an eye on competencies in the environment. So this is what I was just talking about. So the empathy, the humility, the integrity, you're looking at the organization as its own human being or its own entity. And so it's kind of a crazy thing, because suddenly, instead of, well, what's going on here, you can't make yourself crazy. Let's say you're in charge of 50, you're the deputy commander or the deputy CEO or the executive vice president. I don't know all the titles. Titles are kind of crazy anyway. But you're the deputy of 50,000 people. Well, you're going to have those things, and I'll show an example of that. And then we talked about the method and the solution. Well, we'll talk about that in just a second. I'm trying not to go too far on time. So let's go here. Let me fill this up. Right. So you remember this from the hierarchy. So let's go and say that this is a level of an organization, and this is 200 or 300 people. So you've got managers and charges or over some people or some processes, and there's a leader keeping an eye on them. And then here's the leader at the next higher level, leader at the next higher level, leader at the next higher level. Fine, right? Now take that pyramid and put it in here. So now you've got these 5 leaders and all these managers in here. So this is 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. 30 leaders. Okay, and then at the next higher level, it's the same thing, except for you've got 20, and then here's 15, and then here's 10, and then here's 5. Well, if you're up here in this rarefied air, the empathy that you have to deal with, because this leader here can kind of go meet these managers and these leaders and keep an eye on these people or the team that's around them. And so this is individual human beings. If you're up here, you still have the same thing. But now your empathy, now the vigilance that you have to have is you've got to go and randomly check here all the time, right? Margaret Thatcher was famous for showing up in the middle of some meeting just to see what everybody was up to. Unscheduled, unplanned, never told anybody, just walk in. Well, that's what you have to do. And then you walk in somewhere and you can just sense something's not working. Oh, well, let me go find the leader over here and we're going to have to talk about it and work it out. Right? So that's the difference, and that's how it scales. So you keep scaling this to where you're in charge of a company that's got 100,000 people in it. Well, what you absolutely have to do is pay a ton of attention and have a lot of empathy. But the empathy, like I said, is for the organization. And don't listen to the sycophants that are up here. If you make it to this level of an organization as a manager or another leader, you have to have the best integrity. How many stories have you heard of where the big boss was lied to and made the wrong decision? Or somebody was trying to undermine him? Well, you got to trust but verify. And so up here, it's vigilance and empathy all day long. Because, like I said, if you've made it to this level of an organization and you're in charge of it, you better have integrity and you better be humble. Because I've said it before, what the heck are you doing? What are you doing that's impacting this person's life? So if you're going to do something, it better make sense, and it better not be radical, and it better not cause some bunch of chaos. And so that's the thing. So depending on the time, the day, who you're dealing with, let's say that up here you have some problem with an individual human being. Well, then the empathy applies to that human. The integrity and the vigilance applies to what's going on with that team. But these are their own entities. These are their own cultures. These are their own consciousnesses. I don't know what the word is. Consciousness, right? And you're still doing the same thing. Mentor communicated leaders of all levels. The higher up, the more you pay attention. Empathy is not just for people, but the rhythm of the business, and then for the vibe that you want, right? And then integrity promotes the truth at all levels. You just have to have that. And so go back and look at the solution when I was talking about how to do the quarterly or annual or semi-annual meeting, whatever makes sense for your organization. You get all the leaders together and you say, hey, I want you to stand up and say 3 things that went well and 3 things that were a mistake, or 3 things that didn't go the way you wanted, or 3 things that were a problem. So let's just do the math on this real quick. So let's say that we're doing it at this level here. So you've got 25 leaders, like I said. Well, you're the big boss. You should be at that meeting. Just sitting in the back, just listening. And then the next hire manager or whatever should be at that meeting as well. So people stand up, say, here's what went well, here's what went wrong, or here's something that I've been thinking about. Here's a question that I have, because they're all leaders, so you're going to have the same communication. And then as you're going up, the next higher tier, next higher rank, next higher whatever gets up and briefs. So by the time you get to a higher level in the organization, that person stands up and says, okay, I've been listening to this, and of the 15 of you that were talking, for some reason the number 15 fits in my head, and I don't know why. I keep going back to anything over 15 is too much. Anything below is too little. So whatever rank you can get, where you've got boss, leader, some other leaders, and then the junior leaders. Anyway, so the leader walks out and says, hey, I was listening, and I had these 3 things I was going to talk about, and some 3 things that I think went wrong. However, listening to everybody talk, half of you had a problem with this one thing. Well, that was my idea. That was what I wanted to get done. However, it sounds like I didn't communicate it correctly, or the goal was wrong, or so the goal, I still need that result. But we need to fix that, because I still need it, but I'm going to take that off of your plate because you think you messed it up. And I'm going to assume blame because I didn't communicate it correctly. So then imagine that. So you have 15 people. I keep saying 15. It's just the numbers work out. So 15 people that get up and they talk about, so you get a grand total of, well, not 45, 42 things that went perfect or that went really well, and 42 things that got messed up. So at that opportunity, that time, people get to hear 40-something things that they either have already messed up or might mess up or have already fixed. But the big boss should show up at these meetings every so often and make sure that people are doing it with integrity and making sure that they're being honest and making sure that the culture is just somebody stands up and says, I completely messed up. They should not get fired unless they broke the law or did something stupid and caused somebody to lose their life. And so that's that. But I honestly think that question, let's go back up real quick. How does this system work at different levels? I think that's it. It's wherever you are, at whatever level it is, you have to change the philosophy, but it should still be there. Let me fill that up again. So anyway, hopefully that was insightful. And like I said, if you have questions, leadership is a philosophy at gmail.com, all dots in between. And we will see if we can get those answered for you. All right. Thanks so much, and you have a great day. Bye.